Yes, we're back on the Coke Zero because despite the fact that I eat about 3,000 calories a day, I really feel like that one full fat Coke would just put me over the edge.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another spooky episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. I'm feeling very Elle Woods today, you know. I go from two extremes, gothic punk to Barbie pink. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Left for Reddit and Weirdo Wednesday episodes where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime, child abuse and sexual assault. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. But before we dive into this week's episode, let me introduce you to my amazing new sponsor, Gin Rummy Stars. If you know me, then you will know that I grew up in an extremely competitive family where card games were a weekly event. So if you love games as much as we do, then download Gin Rummy Stars by clicking the link in the bio now to win 1,000 free coins. Since moving out of my hometown, I've really been missing those special moments that brought us together. So that's why I'm so glad I found Gin Rummy Stars. My favourite part is that I can just send one text into the family group chat and someone will be there to play against me, even though we're miles apart. Feels like home. I really enjoy playing the Joker's Gin games on Gin Rummy Stars because one, it's easy to play, and two, you can play with people from all over the world. If I've had a hard day of true crime research, I can just kick back on the sofa and de-stress. You know, here at Megan True Crime, we love the animals, so I was really excited to hear that the incredible team at Gin Rummy Stars were supporting animal rights. By July, they will be raising awareness and donating a portion of their proceeds to the IFAW. The International Fund for Animal Welfare Group is a non-profit organisation that strives to make this world a better place for the animals living in it. By protecting and maintaining their natural habitats and by rescuing those in need of immediate care. As if you needed another reason to love Gin Rummy Stars. So, if you're looking for a fabulous new game to play, then download Gin Rummy Stars now by following the link in the bio to win 1,000 free coins. Enjoy! Hello my wee gremlins! The other day someone commented that I sounded like Mrs. Doubtfire, and I'm not really sure whether to be flattered or offended. You can tell that you're starting to creep past your mid-20s when you watch that movie and you sympathise with the mother. When I was like 12 and I used to watch it, I just thought she was such a fun sponge, you know, let the man see his kids. But now I start thinking, well, Robin Williams, who's gonna clean up that horse shit from the living room? I was flicking through some online news articles when I came across an update for an unsolved 1996 murder. I do remember vaguely at the time it happened, my nana, who, for those who don't know, she was a crazy true crime lady fan, and she used to talk about it and kind of warn us, you know. She said you should never leave your kids home alone. In her Glaswegian accent, it only leads to trouble. But the more I tried to dig into this case, it eventually dawned on me that this actually happened 25 years ago, and we're still no closer to any resolution. Almost 3 whole decades later, the family of this poor girl are still waiting for answers and praying every single day that new DNA technology can shine a light on this 90s cold case. So tonight, everyone, we will be looking into the brutal murder of Billie Jo Jenkins. No place like home. The Jenkins family of Hastings in East Sussex were the type of family you'd see on your television in the late 80s, early 90s. As the heads of the household, you had Mum Lois, who was a social worker, and Dad Sean, who was the vice principal to the local all-boys school, William Parker School. Their 5 beautiful daughters, Annie, Charlotte, Esther, Maya and Billie Jo, lived a charmed life in a 3-storey Victorian townhouse at 48 Lower Park Road. Weekends were usually filled with visits to the seaside, trips into town for school supplies and chores at home. And on the morning of February 15th, 1997, life was no different for the Jenkins. Charlotte Jenkins was getting ready for her clarinet lesson. Annie was outside washing her dad's MG convertible, and Billie Jo was given the task of walking the family dog, and upon her return, she was to paint the frame of the patio doors. Lois and her other 2 daughters, Esther and Maya, were off out into town, so the 3 girls would be remaining at home with their father Sean. As instructed, Billie took her furry friend Buster, the family's Staffordshire Terrier, to the local park for a walk. She didn't actually mind this job as she loved Buster dearly, and she kinda enjoyed escaping from the madness of the house for an hour or so. When 13-year-old Billie arrived back, she got straight to work on those patio doors, but she was not the best or most precise painter, so she looked out a bottle of white spirit in case she had any spills. Later in the afternoon, at around 2:55 p.m, Sean Jenkins left the family home along with Annie to pick up Charlotte from her clarinet lesson, leaving Billie Jo at home alone in the garden to finish up on her painting. The 3 of them returned home, but they wouldn't stay for long, and Sean and Annie waited inside his convertible while Charlotte ran upstairs to put her clarinet away. She then got back into the car and they headed off on a separate excursion. Sean had told his daughters that Billie Jo had gotten a little bit overzealous with her painting, so they had to head to a local DIY store to pick up white spirit to help her clean it off of the tiles. When Sean and his 2 daughters arrived back at the home, everything seemed pretty normal as they had left it, and Annie and Charlotte ran through the home towards the patio doors to see how their sister was getting on with her painting job. But what they would discover would haunt them for years to come. As the 2 terrified little girls crept out towards the patio, they noticed their 13-year-old sister, Billie Jo Jenkins, lying face down in a pool of her own blood and paint. From the other room, Sean was startled by the shrill scream of his 2 daughters. He quickly called 999 and then a local neighbour to come and sit with the girls and help him calm them down. At 4:07 p.m. that afternoon, law enforcement arrived on the scene, and Sean came downstairs to greet them and show them where Billie Jo was. The only way to describe the scene at the back of the house would be a bloodbath. It had appeared that Billie Jo had just been painting away, minding her own business, when someone had snuck up behind her and attacked her without any warning. Billie's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of her head. It had appeared that she had been struck several times with a heavy object. Laying near the young girl's remains, police found an 18-inch metal tent spike, and it was later confirmed that this was the murder weapon. There was no signs of sexual assault or any signs of an attempted sexual assault, so it appeared that this monster had just attacked Billie out of the blue and then left. When Lois Jenkins and her 2 daughters finally arrived home, it was completely unrecognisable from the house they had seen just hours before. Crime scene tape covered every doorway. Men and women in uniforms were looking for answers to questions that Lois just did not understand. This was such a senseless crime, and as investigators tried to piece together how this fairy tale by the seaside had turned into a grim nightmare, they started to question whether Billie Jo's life had been as idyllic as it seemed. Billie Jo Jenkins was born on the 29th of March 1983 in the East End of London. She was one of two children born to Deborah Barnett and Baynard Jenkins, but she and her sister Margaret had had a troubled start to their little lives. At a really young age, Billie's father was sent to prison and her mother struggled with alcoholism and raising these two little girls on her own. So in June 1992, it was decided that the children would be taken out of her care. Margaret would be taken in by her biological father's family, whereas a 9-year-old Billie Jo was placed within the foster care system. A choice that still to this day makes absolutely no sense to her sister Margaret, who lives with the overwhelming guilt of what would happen next. In that summer of 1992, Billie Jo moved to Hastings, where she would now be living with her new family, Sean, Lois, and their 4 daughters. The fact that her new foster parents and siblings oddly shared the same surname as her seemed like a sign to Billie that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. A city girl, born and raised, school friends said Billie would love going to the beach. It was a setting that she never got to experience on the busy streets of London. The young girl would attend Helenswood School, where she discovered a passion for acting and performance. She loved being able to play these different characters for the school plays. At home, Billie was punished for her extrovert and outspoken character, but on stage, she was praised for it. One of Billie Jo's closest friends said that she was just like any other girl in the 90s. She would read the trashy magazines and blast East 17's greatest hits out of her cassette player. But life as Billie's confidant wasn't always fun and games, as at times she would express a real fear towards her guardians, more specifically her father Sean. On one occasion, she'd even written "I hate my dad" across her knuckles at school, and she'd told her closest friends that that night when she got home and Sean saw this, he flew into a rage and even slapped Billie Jo across the face. According to Billie and her other siblings, if their father was unhappy with you, you knew all about it. He would hunt them down in the 3-story home and hit them with whatever he had nearby, whether that was a slipper or a large ruler or even sometimes just his hands. Control was a massive thing to Sean Jenkins, and as a disciplinarian by trade, he would not tolerate bad behaviour or what he considered to be bad behaviour. But unfortunately, the 5 siblings weren't the only ones on the receiving end of Sean's notorious temper. One day, Billie Jo allegedly went into school with deep scratches across her face, and at this point it seemed like she had ran out of excuses. She confessed to her close childhood friend that her father had attacked her in their hallway after she yelled at him for hitting the dog. When she was really young and had just arrived within the Jenkins home, Sean Jenkins would tell anyone who would listen about Billie Jo's unruly temper and the fact that she would often pull Barbie dolls' heads off of their bodies. But her friends said this couldn't have been further from the loving and nurturing Billie Jo that they knew. She even took care of her pet gerbil named Charlie, her 2 goldfish, Ping and Pong, and of course her beloved dog Buster. As the Jenkins girls got older, naturally they partook in some sibling rivalry. Even on the day that Billie died, her sister Annie was a little bit upset about the fact that Billie was able to do a fun job by painting and she had to go out and clean her father's car. But she was not the only one unhappy with her tasks that day. The day before the attack, Billie Jo had went into town to the department store Debenhams to look for a pair of new trainers. She'd finally picked out a style that she liked and she was hoping that that day she'd be able to go into town with her mum to pick them up. In the lead up to her murder, her home life wasn't the only thing causing giving Billie Jo concern. In fact, she'd been telling close friends that she felt like someone was watching her. As the 13-year-old schoolgirl walked home one day, she noticed a man following behind. Thinking nothing of it, she turned onto her street. But so did he. Every time she turned round to get a closer look at this guy, he would duck his head down. Substantially freaked out and sure she was being followed, Billie Jo ran home. She wasn't the only one to feel uneasy at that time. In fact, her foster mother Lois had placed several calls to police about an abandoned home just next door. The Victorian townhouse attached to theirs was being renovated, but it had laid empty for months, falling prey to squatters. The Jenkins family believed that the most recent resident had sinister motives, as the girls had claimed to have seen a prowler looking in their windows at night. They felt so unsafe, in fact, that in 1997, Sean had bolts fitted to the windows and also motion-censored security lights installed. But knowing what we now know about Sean Jenkins and the grip he had over his family, we need to question whether these new security measures were taken out of fear or to keep tabs on his teenage daughters. Lois Jenkins sadly would not be exempt from Sean's alleged cruelty, however, and later on she would come forward to police saying that her perfect life was nothing but a lie. The abuse for the young woman began only 3 weeks before their wedding in the December of 1982. The couple, who before this moment had been very much in love and happy, were having a conversation. It got kind of heated and Lois clearly said something that Sean didn't like because he slapped her across the face, knocking her onto the ground. But unlike most abusers, there was no crocodile tears and no empty promises to never do it again. No, as Lois sat there in disbelief, shivering on the ground, Sean just walked right past her. The very next day, as Lois prepared to leave Sean, he simply pretended that it had never happened. So the young bride-to-be decided to confront him. In the most shocking, gaslighty turn of events, he denied that this had ever happened. In fact, he said that she was delusional and even made her question her own memory and sanity. For weeks, he manipulated his fiancée into going ahead with the wedding as planned, which she did. But obviously, the violence didn't stop there. In fact, she said living with Sean was like living with someone with dual personalities. One day, he would be completely fine, and then the next day, he would experience what she said was vein-popping anger. On one particular evening in 1995, things got so bad in the home that her eardrum was perforated while Sean beat her over the head. All of the Jenkins girls lived in fear of Sean, and everyone wanted to stay in his good graces, even if that meant throwing one of your very own sisters into the firing line. However, young Billie Jo was different. She'd been raised in a different environment to her siblings, and although it was dysfunctional, yes, her old life had never been violent. Her former life gave her an insight that sadly her other siblings lacked. She knew this kind of abuse was not normal in families, and because of that, she kicked back, and she was not about to let her new dad break her spirit. Even the day before her murder on Valentine's Day, Billie was in her room blasting her favourite music, something that Daddy Dearest did not like. So he came up and told her to turn her music down, and when she refused, his notorious temper made an appearance. Sean's outbursts weren't only confined to the walls of the family home though. No. In August of 1996, the family went away on holiday to the south of France with close family friends, the Gamesters. During the vacation at the French farmhouse, Billie Jo had been playing with her siblings and had fallen over and sprained her ankle, something Sean was adamant she had done on purpose for attention. That very same evening, the father from the other family, Peter Gamester, was told by his daughter that she had heard a commotion upstairs and believed that Billie Jo and Sean were fighting, and that it was pretty bad. Concerned, he followed the noise upstairs until he found his friend, Sean Jenkins, kicking his daughter Billie Jo repeatedly on her sore ankle. In his typical amnesia, this is Days of Our Lives fashion, he would deny this ever happened when he was confronted about it. In the first couple of days of the investigation, Sean Jenkins wasn't even on police's radar. So, focusing outside the home, law enforcement wondered who would have the opportunity and the motive to bludgeon this beautiful little girl to death. Well, some locals and a bed and breakfast owner had their own ideas. A scruffy looking man carrying a shopping bag had been seen around the town acting suspiciously on the day Billie died. He had seemed very confused to the B&B owner, and after mumbling incoherently for a couple of minutes, he simply walked off in the direction of Billie's home. This man, known only as Mr. B, was also known to frequent a local park that was only 15 minutes away from Billie's home. However, this was not the only creepy connection. Remember the day before Billie's murder, she had been at the department store Debenhams looking for new trainers. Well, Mr. B had also been in Debenhams that day and was caught on CCTV. Just to avoid suspicion, he even purchased a 50p spoon only to refund it later on. Retail staff said that the man was mumbling and constantly looking over his shoulder as if he was looking for someone in particular. When police knocked on this man's door regarding Billie Jo's murder, things escalated pretty quickly when he attacked and subsequently started choking a female police officer. After he was pried off of her and taken into custody, he was deemed mentally unfit to be interviewed. Despite his severe mental illness, Mr. B seemed to be a possible, if not strong, suspect in Billie's case. There was one thing I haven't told you, and it was the fact that when Billie was found, she had been found to have plastic stuffed up her nose, so far up there that the coroner said that it seemed like some sort of deranged act. Well, Mr. B also had a fetish for soft plastics. Anything from plastic bags to plastic wrap, and what he would like to do is seal up entrances with it because he felt like that way the evil couldn't seep out of the entrances and get to him. This large unstable man with a noticeable birthmark on the centre of his face also matched the description of a child predator who had sexually assaulted 2 young girls in Hastings in 1996, only 1 year before Billie was murdered. One of these children was grabbed in a park named St. Leonard's Park, which was only an 8-minute drive or 35-minute walk away from Billie Jo's house. This wee incredible survivor described her attacker as a large scruffy man with a noticeable scar or birthmark on his face, and during the attack he also put a dirty plastic carrier bag over her head. The child rapist in both of those local cases has never been found, and no connection has formally been made yet back to Mr. B. Because of the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Mr. B was arrested under the suspicion of murder. However, because of several witness statements that put him in a different area that day, he would soon be set free. A few people in a local park that day, which was 15 minutes away from the crime scene, said that he was sitting on a bench at the time of Billie Jo's murder. So, he couldn't possibly have been in her back garden at that time. And just like that, he was no longer a suspect, which led to a lot of disgruntled locals who believed that he was let away far too easily. What the Jenkins' angry neighbours didn't know is that law enforcement had their next person of interest already picked out. Sean Jenkins. In the immediate aftermath, it's safe to say that this foster father's behaviour was slightly odd. Now, I try not to be too judgmental with things like that because grief is a strange and powerful thing. On the 999 call, Sean appears abnormally calm and describes the scene as an accident, as if someone had fallen over. Now, if you've seen the crime scene photos of this, and I won't put them here for the sake of the family, but if you would like to Google those, please do, because the best way I can describe it is literally like a horror film. It was a bloodbath. There is no way that anyone, no matter how much in shock you were, could describe this as the scene of someone who had simply fallen over. Several times whilst on the phone with Sean, the dispatcher asks him if Billie Jo is breathing, and he says he doesn't know, but makes no effort to confirm this. He's also instructed to perform basic first aid on his child of 5 years by simply putting her into the fetal position, which he refuses to do so. When he's asked a series of questions about Billie Jo and the scene, he says that he doesn't know because he hasn't seen her, which suggests that after his daughters found his other daughter, he didn't bother to check up on her. During a live press conference, it was clear to see the difference in Lois's and Sean's demeanours. Sean takes charge throughout the appearance and he seems to be quite arrogant, as if he's enjoying the sound of his own voice and barely lets Lois speak. Cracks in the Jenkins armour were starting to show. During the appearance, Lois for the most part keeps her head down, but when she does look up, it looks like she's seething mad at her husband. Little did viewers know this would be the beginning of the end. Investigators, now fixated on Billie Jo's home life, started looking into her foster father's movements that day, and they found some strange activity. Sean was claiming that despite upping his home security in recent months out of fear that there was a dangerous prowler in the area, he left his teenage daughter home alone not only once that day, but twice. Remember, the reason for this impromptu trip to the DIY store was for White Spirit. But there's a few things wrong with that picture. The family had white spirit, plenty of it. It had actually been looked out for Billie that day in case she spilled any paint. So what was the point in the trip? Also, when Sean, Annie and Charlotte left the home, instead of going to a local decorating shop at the bottom of the road, Sean decided to go that extra 5-10 minute journey to a larger DIY store in a retail park. The father of 5 then set off for the do-it-all DIY store in the strangest fashion I've ever seen. He does a double loop around the estate and doubles back in front of the family home. When the three of them arrived at the do-it-all eventually, Sean had said that, whoopsie, he'd forgotten his wallet. So instead of driving straight home, he drives around the car park a few times and then heads back in the direction of the house. Was this strange journey simply to establish an alibi? It would sure seem that way, as Sean Jenkins had told law enforcement he was away for around 35 to 40 minutes, when in reality, CCTV proved it was about 10 minutes. The family's clothing had been taken from the day of the murder and everyone's came back clean, except for Sean's. Despite saying he had not gone anywhere near Billie Jo's body, he had blood spatter found on his shoes and on his fleece. The final nail in her foster dad's coffin, however, was a bucket of water that was found next to Billie Jo's body. Police believed that this bucket of water had been taken from the home into the back garden by the killer as they contemplated cleaning up the scene. When they realised just how quickly the blood had started spreading, they decided against the cleanup and decided instead to stage a home invasion/intruder attack. On the 24th of February 1997, Sean Jenkins was arrested for the first-degree murder of Billie Jo Jenkins. When he was apprehended from his home, investigators couldn't help but take notice of the book that was sitting on his nightstand, Silence of the Lambs. As he was laid out and taken into custody, he shouted, "Lois, I swear it'll be all right." She simply put her head down, looked at the ground and said, "It won't though." After the arrest, investigators focused in on Sean's family, feeling like the pretty picture he had painted was far from the truth. And with a little bit of pressure, that truth would soon be revealed, as Lois Jenkins finally confessed to the years of abuse she had experienced at the hands of her husband. The kids and Lois were informed that the circumstantial and physical evidence against Sean was overwhelming, and after a discussion with a psychiatrist, it was deduced that Sean had somehow manipulated Charlotte and Annie into lying about his whereabouts that day. Sean had always claimed that when he dropped Charlotte off to put her clarinet upstairs, he and Annie had never gotten out of the car, but this was a lie. Sean had been placed inside the home for roughly about 5 to 10 minutes, which was now unaccounted for. Law enforcement believed that day Sean Jenkins snapped. He'd had enough. He'd went into the back garden and noticed that Billy was making a mess of the painting. There were splashes everywhere, and so he flew in to one of his notorious rages. The tent spike belonged to the Jenkins family and would have been laying nearby, an easy weapon for an enraged foster father. He then drove around aimlessly, trying to establish a window of time where an intruder could have come in and attacked his daughter. Sean Jenkins was then found guilty of the first-degree murder of his foster daughter and sentenced to life in prison. But he was not going to give up without a fight. He appealed his conviction in 1999 unsuccessfully, but again in 2004, and this time his legal team had a new story to tell. A forensic expert for the defence claimed that the blood spatter found on Sean's clothing from that day could have been caused by something called recoil pressure. This can cause excess air in the lungs to push out blood via the nearest exit. Sean said that on the day Billie died, he had noticed a bubble of blood appearing in her nostril, and when it burst, this is when the blood spatter went on his shoes and clothes. Because of this new theory, Sean's conviction was deemed unsafe, and therefore he was granted a brand new trial. After being shown the evidence, the jury still couldn't reach a decision after 39 hours of deliberation, and therefore he was awarded a mistrial and told he would be tried again the following year. This time was slightly different though. Certain aspects of the case were now deemed inadmissible in court and would not be discussed with jurors, such as the domestic violence claims. It was also later discovered that the blood specks that were found on Sean's clothing also contained bone fragments and metal particles which were consistent of that of the tent spike. However, this would never be entered into evidence as prosecutors missed their deadline, and it wouldn't have given the defence enough time to construct a response. That same year, 10 years after Billie Jo was murdered in her very own back garden, Sean Jenkins was acquitted as once again jurors failed to make a unanimous decision. Since his release, Sean has married a millionaire heiress who wrote to him in prison whilst he was serving time for the murder of his daughter.
Are you not embarrassed? This is really embarrassing.
He also tried to sue the British police for wrongful prosecution, to which they were like, "No, we still think you did it, we just can't get enough evidence to prove you did it." Because of this, Sussex police don't consider Billie Jo Jenkins' murder investigation as an active investigation. However, they do hope that advances in DNA technology will eventually bring her killer to justice. If we're playing devil's advocate here though, I can't help but wonder about the initial suspect, Mr. B. Was Billie Jo's mystery stalker able to sneak in and out that day without detection? Or did Sean Jenkins truly get away with murder. Billie Jo's biological father and his family have been extremely outspoken about their opinions on the case. Their baby daughter was taken away in the hopes of a better life, but unfortunately that life was cut short. The red flags in the Jenkins family were all missed, and Billie Jo had no idea to what she was walking into. All she wanted was to be wanted, to be loved, but now all she'll be is missed. If you have any information regarding this case, no matter how small, please contact Crime Stoppers using the number in the link below. If you like this episode, give it a big thumbs up for me. It really helps my channel. If you're watching for the first time and my double chin hasn't put you off, then please hit that subscribe button. If you would like to follow me, not home or to Tesco, because remember it's illegal, then you can follow me at Megan True Crime on Instagram. I also have a TikTok page at Megan.truecrime, and we're gonna go back in time to 2001 because I've got a Twitter page at Megan True Crime. I know this one was a wee serious Sally case, but I think it's important to get the stories of the missing and murdered out there so that one day we can eventually bring these people home and get these cases solved. So, as we always say, I love you so much. Please remember to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and don't hit animals, because if you do, I'm pretty sure you go down to the Burnie fire. See ya! Big kisses.